What's up everybody, and welcome back to A Day in Charleston behind the scenes. This week we're going to be talking about a nighttime hyperlapse that I shot down at the Battery. Let's get into it. The technique when you're shooting a nighttime hyperlapse with a tripod is very similar to when you're shooting a daytime hyperlapse handheld. Basically you're taking a photo, moving a little bit, taking a photo, moving a little bit, and you're keeping that one subject, the one part of that subject in the same part of your viewfinder in every frame. That's the basics of it. When I'm shooting a hyperlapse with a tripod, I'll generally move the tripod about 1 foot length in between shots. So you take your shot, put your foot down, measure out a foot length, move the tripod, frame your shot up again, take a shot, move it 1 foot length again, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about the gear I used to shoot that hyperlapse. The camera was a Panasonic GH4, the lens was a Lumix 12 to 35 millimeter, and I think I had it all the way wide at 12 millimeters, and I also used a Manfrotto tripod. You're going to want to use a tripod, a nice sturdy tripod for these nighttime hyperlapses so you can get a longer exposure. You're also going to want to use a mirrorless camera. For me, I like the Panasonics, but you could also use a Sony or an Olympus or any of the mirrorless ones. And it's because you want to have that live view at all times to make sure when you're lining your next shot up that that same part of the shot is in the same part of the viewfinder, and that's much easier to do with a mirrorless camera where you can instantly see what your shot is going to look like. A quick side note, for any time-lapse or hyperlapse you want to shoot at least 100 photos. Less than that, you're not going to have a lot of video to work with after you render it out. 100 photos will give you 4 seconds of video, so just keep that in mind when you're shooting your own time lapses. Now that we've covered the basics, we'll go into LR time-lapse and I'll show you the exact photo settings that I used, I'll show you the unedited time-lapse, and we'll talk a little bit more about the technique of shooting a hyperlapse with a tripod. This is how the unedited time-lapse looks. That's straight from the raw files, no editing, no stabilizing, no nothing. Over here you can see the camera settings I used. I used a constant shutter of 5 seconds, ISO at 200. You want to use as low an ISO as possible, and the same with the aperture. I used f2.8. That's as wide as that lens will go. Now when you look at the interval, you'll actually see that it jumps around quite a bit, anywhere from 19 seconds to about 30 seconds. And that is because every time I move the tripod, sometimes I would move it, look at the camera, and the framing would be spot on. I could take that photo and keep going. Sometimes though, I had to readjust a little bit, and it took me, anywhere from 10 seconds or so to get that adjustment right and take the photo. Also, I'm on a walking platform here at the Battery, and people were walking in front of the camera, so there are a couple where it took me, 46 seconds or 41 seconds in between photos. It's not ideal, but I was able to get away with it because I was using some long exposures here. LR time-lapse was an easy way to show you guys the camera settings I used, and also to talk about that interval, because that's a pretty important part of the hyperlapse. I actually didn't use LR time-lapse to edit these photos because there wasn't much variation in the exposure. I really only used Lightroom to edit the photos, and we'll talk about that right now. What I do is I go to the middle of the photos, select one photo that's right from the middle, go hit D, go into the Develop module, and I edit that photo. You can see here are a few of the settings that I'm using, and what you do once you've got one looking good is you take it, select all of them, Command A, and go to Sync, and you want to check all and then click Synchronize. After you've synchronized it, you go look at the start, look at the end, make sure it looks good all the way throughout. If you don't like something, you go back in, tweak it, sync the settings all again, and you just keep doing that and tweaking it and syncing all the settings until you get it to a place that looks really good. Once you've got all your photos looking good, the final step is to stabilize it in After Effects. I talked about that a little bit in the last tutorial, so I'm not going to do it in this one. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch my last tutorial. So if you're interested in that or you're not familiar with it, you can go check that one out. So that's that. I hope you learned something today. Next week we're going to be talking about one of my favorite time lapses from A Day in Charleston. It's the day to night time lapse of the Ravenel Bridge. I'll give you a sneak peek of it right now. This is Matt Coda signing off.